policies. I am proud of all of them for their tireless commitment to public service. I would also like to applaud all employees of banks and financial entities for ensuring uninterrupted operations in these trying times. Our gratitude also goes out to all COVID warriors, medical and health personnel, police and other law enforcement agencies, authorities at various levels, and others. In the MPC's assessment, global economic activity has remained fragile and in retrenchment in the first half of 2020. A renewed surge in COVID-19 infections in major economies in July has subdued some early signs of revival that had appeared in May and June. Global financial markets, however, have been buoyant, with return of risk-off sentiment inserting a disconnect from the underlying state of the real economy. Portfolio inflows to emerging markets have resumed and their currencies have also appreciated. The Global Manufacturing Purchase Managers Index PMI and Global Services PMI rose to 50.3 and 50.5 respectively in July, moving back to the expansion zone. The World Trade Organization has estimated that the volume of merchandise trade shrank by 3% year-on-year in Q1, and early estimates suggest a fall of 18.5% in Q2. CPI inflation remains largely subdued across major advanced economies, primarily due to benign fuel prices and soft aggregate demand since March. In most of the emerging market economies, however, CPI inflation, after easing in April and May, rose in June amidst cost push pressures. Domestic food inflation remains elevated across most of the economies since the onset of the pandemic. The MPC noted that in India too, economic activity had started to recover from the lows of April and May. However, surges of fresh infections have forced reclamping of lockdowns in several cities and states. Consequently, several high-frequency indicators have leveled off. The agriculture sector's prospects are strengthened by the progress of the southwest monsoon and the expansion in the total area sown under Kharif crops by 13.9% up to July 31 over the previous year. That is, over the corresponding period of the previous year. Industrial production remained in contraction, albeit at a moderated pace in May. The Manufacturing Purchase Managers Index, PMI, shrank in July for the fourth consecutive month. PMI services remained in contractionary zone in July, although the downturn eased relative to the June reading. Headline inflation, which was 5.8% in March, was placed at 6.1% in the provisional estimates for June 2020. Inflation pressures were evident across all subgroups. Households 1 year ahead inflation expectations were lower than their 3 months ahead expectations in July 2020 round of the Reserve Bank's survey, indicating their anticipation of lower inflation over the longer horizon. Producers' sentiment on input prices remained muted as their salary outgoes fell. The selling price contracted in Q1 in April to June round of the Reserve Bank's Industrial Outlook survey. India's merchandise exports contracted for the fourth successive month in June 2020, although the pace of fall moderated. Imports fell sharply in June in a broad-based manner, reflecting weak domestic demand and low international crude oil prices. The merchandise trade balance recorded a surplus in June of the order of US $0.8 billion after a gap of over 18 years. India's foreign exchange reserves have increased by 56.8 billion in the current financial year, that is in 2021, so far during April to July, to 534.6 billion US dollars as on July 31st, 2020, equivalent to 13.4 months of imports. The ratio of foreign exchange reserves to external debt has gone up from 76% at the end of March 2019 to 85.5% at the end of March 2020. Let me now focus on the outlook for growth and inflation. Against this backdrop, the MPC was of the view that supply chain disruptions on account of COVID-19 persist, with implications for both food and non-food prices. A more favorable food inflation outlook may emerge as the bumper Rabi crop harvest eases prices of cereals, especially if open market sales and public distribution offtake are expanded on the back of significantly higher procurement. Nonetheless, upside risks to food prices do remain. The abatement of price pressures in key vegetables is delayed and remains contingent upon normalization of supplies. Protein-based food items could also emerge as a pressure point. High domestic taxes on petroleum products have resulted in elevated domestic pump prices and will impart broad-based cost push pressures going forward. Taking into consideration all these factors, the MPC expects headline inflation to remain elevated in Q2 2021, but likely to ease in the second half, aided by favorable base effects. As regards the outlook for growth, the MPC noted that recovery in rural economy is expected to be robust, buoyed by the progress in Kharif sowing. Manufacturing firms expect domestic demand to recover gradually from Q2 and to sustain through Q1 21-22. On the other hand, consumer confidence turned more pessimistic in July relative to the preceding round of Reserve Bank's survey. External demand is expected to remain anemic under the weight of global recession and contraction in global trade. Taking into consideration the above factors, real GDP growth in the first half of the year is estimated to remain in the contraction zone. For the year 2021 as a whole, real GDP growth is also estimated to be negative. An early contraction, or rather an early containment of COVID-19 pandemic may impart an upside to the outlook. A more protracted spread of the pandemic, deviations from the forecast of a normal monsoon, and global financial market volatility are the key downside risks. The MPC noted that in an environment of unprecedented stress, supporting recovery of the economy assumes primacy in the conduct of monetary policy. While the space for further monetary policy action is available, it is important to use it judiciously to maximize the beneficial effects on the underlying economy. At the same time, the MPC is conscious of its medium-term inflation target. The headline inflation prints of April and May 2020 are obscured by the spike in food prices and cost push pressures. Meanwhile, the cumulative reduction of 250 basis points is working its way through the economy, lowering interest rates in money, bond, and credit markets, and narrowing down the spreads. Given the uncertainty surrounding the inflation outlook and extremely weak state of the economy in the midst of an unprecedented shock from the ongoing pandemic, the MPC decided to keep the policy rate on hold while remaining watchful for a durable reduction in inflation to use the available space to support the revival of the economy. There are more details available in the MPC's resolution, which will be uploaded immediately after this statement is over. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at the resolution of the MPC, which contains even greater details. Living with the pandemic has improved the way we manage it. Working from home, virtual meetings, and contactless transactions. Throughout this traumatic period, one thing has stood out: the indomitable spirit of humanity. The inner conviction that whatever be the challenge, we have the innate resilience to combat them, overcome them, and emerge victorious. I continue to be an eternal optimist, and I feel Mahatma Gandhi should inspire us. And in Mahatma Gandhi's words, if our resolve is firm and our conviction clear, it would mean half the battle won, unquote. Let me now highlight against this backdrop, I would like to highlight the impact of the monetary and liquidity measures so far taken by the Reserve Bank to mitigate the negative fallout of COVID-19. I thought it necessary to point out some of these aspects which are known, which are obviously available in the public domain. But I often hear questions being raised in the public space about the effectiveness of the rate cuts that the MPC has undertaken over the past, starting from February 19 and more in a more pronounced manner after the onset of the pandemic. So I thought it is necessary that let me in brief highlight some of the impact in our assessment, the impact of the monetary and liquidity policy measures which have been undertaken by the Reserve Bank. It may be noted that transmission of the rate cuts by MPC would not have been possible to the extent achieved so far without creating comfortable liquidity conditions. The overriding objective was to prevent
आरबीआय गव्हर्नर शक्तिकांत दास यांची पत्रकार परिषद सुरू आहे आणि यातून त्यांनी रेपो आणि रिव्हर्स रेपो रेटमध्ये कोणताही बदल झालेला नाही अशी माहिती दिलेली आहे. आपण याबाबतच अधिक जाणून घेऊया. आपल्याबरोबर अर्थतज्ञ अभिजित केळकर आहेत. अभिजित केळकर, आरबीआयची पत्रकार परिषद सध्या सुरू आहे. रेपो रेट रिव्हर्स रेपो रेटमध्ये कोणताही बदल नाहीये. सामान्य कर्जदारांना काय दिलासा मिळालाय असं वाटतं का याच्यातून?
नाही, माझ्या मते कर्जदारांना याच्यामध्ये कुठलाही दिलासा देण्याचा प्रश्नच येत नाही. आरबीआय गव्हर्नरनी हे स्पष्ट केलेलं आहे की त्यांनी आधी रेपो रेट आणि रिव्हर्स रेपो रेट कमी करून जे काही निधी विविध फायनान्शियल इन्स्टिट्यूशन्स आणि बँकांना उपलब्ध करून देण्याचा प्रयत्न केला तो याच्यानंतर ते करणार नाहीये. याचा अर्थ असाही होतो की आता बँकांकडचा जो निधी आहे तो बँकांनी पूर्णपणे वापरावा आणि त्यांना रिव्हर्स रेपो रेट किंवा रेपो रेट कमी करून नवीन निधी उपलब्ध होण्याचा आता मार्ग नाही, हे त्यातनं स्पष्ट होत आहे.
शक्तिकांत दास हेही म्हणालेले आहेत की हळूहळू अर्थव्यवस्था सुधारते आहे. यासाठी हे त्यांच्या या म्हणण्यामध्ये कितपत तथ्य असं वाटतं?
नाही, तसं वस्तुस्थिती सुद्धा आहे की कारण अनलॉक सुरू झाल्यानंतर आता व्यवसाय पुन्हा सुरू झालेले आहे. जरी आधीच्या हिशोबाने तेवढी त्याच्यामध्ये प्रगती नाही आहे, पण हळूहळू सुरुवात झालेली आहे आणि ओव्हर द पिरियड असं लक्षात येत आहे की अनलॉक वाढत जाणार, व्यवसाय परत पूर्ण त्यांच्या मार्गावर येण्याचा प्रयत्न करत राहणार. हे मात्र नक्की आपण ज्या लेवलवर होतो त्या लेवलवर यायला 2-4 महिने तर कमीत कमी लागतील, मे बी वर्ष लागेल आहे, पण व्यवहार सुरू झालेले आहे, याच्यात काही शंका नाही. आणि आरबीआयचं जे त्याच्यावरचं दृष्टिकोन आहे तो बरोबर आहे.
धन्यवाद अभिजित केळकरजी. झी24 तासकडे आपली ही प्रतिक्रिया नोंदवल्याबद्दल. आरबीआयची पत्रकार परिषद आपण पाहिली आणि त्यामध्ये रेपो रेट आणि रिव्हर्स रेपो रेटमध्ये तसंच व्याजदरामध्ये कोणताही बदल करण्यात आलेला नाही.